So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the warm welcome this morning. Thank you for the preemptive warm welcome on social media. I saw a couple of different posts that I was coming. Normally when I see my picture pop up on social media, I don't read the comments. Right? I read the comments. You all were very nice, so thank you for having me. My name is Jeff Babajtis. I am a lot of different things. I was a pastor for 14 years. I'm a photographer. I teach Bible studies. I do a little bit of social media and web design. For the last 15 years or so, I've had a series of side hustles that usually involve doing whatever Claire Cox Woodleaf tells me to do. Some of you also do that, apparently. She's one of my favorite people. She likes tapping me in for projects, and I love being tapped in. So, yeah. But my main job is that I'm the Development and Communications Director for Family Promise, the Triangle. And if you don't know what Development and Communications Director means, let me just tell you that it's nonprofit speak for I make TikTok videos and ask people for money. I love fundraising, and I'll tell you that it is an honor to do fundraising for an incredible organization like Family Promise, the Triangle. We serve families experiencing homelessness. I'm going to be making a whole presentation about this during lunch, so please stick around for that. If you're interested in being a part of what we do, because this is an increasing issue in our community, family homelessness has actually doubled in Wake County since the beginning of the pandemic. So just in 4 short years, family homelessness has doubled. So if you'd like to be a part of the solution and be a part of the work that we do, and you can't stay for lunch, please just come get me after the service. If you're watching online, you can feel free to email me using the contact information on our website. Anyway, let's get to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, that passage that Catherine read earlier in the service. About a month ago, I sat down with Pastor Ann and we talked a little bit about what this service could possibly look like. We did a little bit of worship planning. I asked if St. Francis was accustomed to using the lectionary texts, those regular Sunday morning readings, and she said yes. And so I got back to my office at Family Promise and I took a look at the lectionary texts and I saw this one in 2 Corinthians about giving and generosity and giving out of abundance. And I thought to myself, well, isn't this nice? I am a former pastor turned professional fundraiser, and one of the first times I get asked back to preach somewhere, I get handed this text that encourages people to give abundantly. I am the furthest thing from a fundamentalist, but even I'm a little bit tempted as a professional fundraiser to say, well, folks, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Dig deep. Don't worry, I'm not going to do that. Not too much anyway. We'll save that for lunch. Instead, what I really want to talk about is why this is so important. Paul, the Apostle Paul, the author of this text, he says that there needs to be a fair balance. And he quotes the book of Exodus, and he says that those who have much shouldn't have too much. And it's also that those who have little shouldn't have too little. But why? Why is this so important? Why is this such an ethic for Paul? Well, to answer that question, I want to talk about coffee. And specifically, I want to talk about the second cup of coffee that I have every single morning. This second cup of coffee, this is a solitary activity for me. It happens just after my wife leaves for work. She takes our 2-year-old and our 5-year-old to preschool on her way to work, so it feels especially quiet and solitary. Have you ever been in a house where there are children under the age of 5 and they're suddenly gone? It is a special kind of quiet, isn't it? So I boil the water, and I grind my beans, and I make myself a little pour over in my favorite cup that I drink alone in the quiet after everyone else is gone. So I've made it abundantly clear, this is a solo activity, correct? Correct? All right, both of you, good. But is it? I mean, is this really a solo activity? Let's walk through this. I didn't exactly pump the water into my house, did I? The city of Raleigh took care of that for me. And then at some point in 2007, when my house was built, some plumber or contractor installed all the pipes and the sink, and I didn't exactly forge a kettle for myself to boil water in. I bought an electric kettle from Target, thank you very much. And somebody, somewhere, designed it and manufactured it, and it's powered by the good people at Duke Energy. And I don't roast the beans myself. Some employee at Counterculture Coffee in South Durham did that for me. And then somebody in his warehouse shipped it to a guy named Mike at my local coffee shop, where he weighs it out for me and sells it to me. All of these people are involved in this second cup of coffee in the morning, and we haven't even gotten into the people who grew and harvested the beans. And as for that mug, it was made by a potter somewhere in the mountains near Asheville, and I bought it at a shop run by a woman who is from, naturally, Helsinki, Finland. What? So isn't it interesting that this incredibly solo activity, quiet, solo, solitary activity of my second cup of coffee in the morning isn't solo at all, and it actually involves hundreds of people from all over the world who work in farming and harvesting and water quality control and package design and branding and advertising. How many meetings were there about marketing and shipping and graphic design and roasting techniques that all went into that solitary second cup of coffee that I have in the morning? Here's the point that I'm trying to make. We are way more interconnected than we realize, aren't we? We are way more interconnected than we realize. Even these seemingly solitary activities have the fingerprints of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people all over them. We are way more interconnected than we realize, and we're way more reliant on each other than we realize. And the Apostle Paul, again, the guy who's writing this passage, he has a really good grasp on this idea. And we know this because Paul, especially when he's writing his letters to the Corinthians, there's this particular image that he's fond of, and it's the image of a body, the metaphor of a body. He says that we're all a body together, and a body has many different parts, and so the arm can't very well say to the nose, I don't need you, I have no need for you, because then where would the sense of smell be? All of the parts need each other. Now, here's where this whole body image, body metaphor gets really interesting. When Paul talks about this whole body thing, we have to notice that he never says, you know what, you Corinthians, you need to try a lot harder to be a body. You need to strive to be a body. Instead, Paul says, we are a body. In other words, whether you think you are or not, whether you like it or not, we are all a body together. This isn't something to aspire to. It's not something that we can take or leave. The plain reality is that each and every one of us are way more interconnected to one another than we realize. We are a body. But this seems completely lost on the people of Corinth that Paul is writing to in this passage and throughout the rest of the letters of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. See, Corinth in the first century in the Roman Empire, it was a port city. And port cities in ancient Rome, they tended to have a lot of exceptionally wealthy people living in them. And then on top of that, they were also travel hubs. So have you ever flown out of RDU and noticed that no matter where you're going in the world, you have to stop in Atlanta first? Right? Last time I flew out of RDU, I was going to Logan. I was going to Boston to visit my family. I was going up, right? I had to go 2 hours down to go up. What's the deal with that? Same thing with Corinth, though, in the first century. It was a travel hub. Everybody had to stop in Corinth first. And that means that in Corinth, a lot of ideas are being exchanged. So the people of Corinth, not only were they exceptionally wealthy, but they were also exceptionally well-educated because all of the people were coming and going and sharing all of these different ideas. If you want an image of the kind of person who lived in Corinth, it's the kind of person who shows up to a party and says, sorry I'm late. I scratched my Rolex that I got when I was at Harvard. Harvard University, you may have heard of it. I scratched it against my Bentley, and I had to figure out with one of my garage assistants if it would buff out. So, sorry I'm late. I didn't see any Bentleys in the parking lot, so I thought it might be safe to make that joke here. I checked, believe me. But that's how Paul begins the passage that we just read. And he actually lays it on pretty thick at verse 7. I actually really love, where's Catherine, by the way? Where did you go, Catherine? Catherine, I love the way that you read that, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but you kind of built in a verbal eye roll when you read verse 7, because he actually says, oh, you Corinthians, you excel in everything. In faith, and in speech, in knowledge, in earnestness, or a better translation might be something like in work ethic. But then he says this, he says, I also want you to excel in generosity. Because you know who else lived in Corinth among the mega rich importing and exporting moguls? It was the super poor, who were the crew members on the ships, or who worked the docks, or who, quite frankly, worked the street corners in Corinth. So back to my original question of why. Why is Paul pushing abundant generosity and making sure the people who have much don't have too much, so that the people who have little don't have too little? Why is he pushing this? It's because we're all way more interconnected than we realize. It's because there are no solo activities. It's because none of us, whether we like to believe it or not, none of us are really self-made. Because we are a body. Whether we know it or not, whether we want to recognize it or not, we belong to one another. And this also means that somebody else's suffering, that's my suffering. That's your suffering. Now, before I go any further, I want to make something abundantly clear, because you may have sensed that the sermon is about to take a big dramatic shift. I have no interest in guilting anyone. Like, none whatsoever. If you noticed my last name, it's Polish. So my grandparents, they were first-generation Americans. They were Polish Catholics. So I've had enough guilt for one lifetime. Thank you very much. I remember going to church with my Polish grandmother, and she used to say things like, Jesus died on the cross for you, and you can't sit still for him for 1 hour. Right? Sorry, Grammy, I'm 6. The incense is a little much for my lungs. So yeah, look, I share this to say the point of this sermon isn't to say, dig deep, you greedy such and such. You're just like the Corinthians. I have no interest in guilting anyone. I've had enough guilt for a lifetime. And I want to make this especially clear because I don't want the beautiful message of this passage, like the good news in this passage, I don't want it to be buried under a bunch of guilt. See, when Paul encourages generosity, he literally uses the word grace or gift. That's what it means in Greek. So Paul isn't trying to say, spread the wealth, you greedy Corinthians. Instead, it's almost like Paul is trying to say, you've been given a gift. You've been given a gift, and if you think you're self-made, maybe you need to rethink that, because we're way more interconnected than we realize. So please don't forget, you've been given a gift. At some point or another, someone believed in you. At some point or another, somebody poured themselves into you. Somebody gave you a shot when no one else would. And if you lose sight of that, you lose sight of the opportunity to keep that gift going and keep that grace, keep that gift in circulation. So at Family Promise of the Triangle, where I work, one of the most beautiful and transformational things that I get to hear about are stories from our Hand Up program. This is our homelessness prevention program. For those of you who are a little bit more familiar with what we do, particularly in the past, you might think of us as an agency that provides emergency shelter where families can stay together. Normally, families have to split up into men's shelters, women's shelters, youth shelters. We provide shelter for families to stay in together. But we started adding more programs because over time, we started thinking to ourselves, wait, rather than waiting for people to need shelter, why don't we try preventing an eviction? And then once they're in their home, then they can receive case management and budgeting and life skills and all of that in their own homes that they get to keep rather than in a shelter. Now, over time, we realized that we could do this, get this, for just a little more than $500 per child. We can, some of you are getting your eyebrows raised. Exactly. We can prevent an eviction for a family for just a little more than $500 per child. And people tend to be surprised by that number because it doesn't seem like a lot to prevent an eviction. But we just served our 100th family in this program this week. And so we've talked with hundreds and hundreds of people and hundreds of parents. And we found that for most of them, they just need back utilities paid so that the late fees don't keep adding up while they're trying to go about and live their lives on their budget. Or they had a medical emergency and they had to choose between rent and treatment. They chose treatment, of course, and so now they're in trouble with their landlord. I can't help but think of all these people, all of these families, when I hear Paul say, those who have much shouldn't have too much, so that those who have little don't have too little. Not because we should all be consumed by guilt because we might fall into that category of those who have much, but because this passage is ultimately about keeping the gift in circulation. Someone at some point in your life, in all of our lives, invested in you. They gave you a chance at one point, and it might have felt like nothing to them, but it changed your life. Maybe they took a risk on you by giving you a job even though you weren't completely qualified just yet. Or they offered their friendship when you had absolutely no one left. Or they just sat and cried with you while you were grieving because you just needed someone to listen to. And now you have the opportunity to recognize that we are way more interconnected than any of us realize and keep that gift in circulation. That's why we always say around the office, we call this program a hand up and not a hand out. It's because at one point we all needed a hand up, didn't we? Didn't we? At one point or another, all of us needed a hand up, just one little boost that might have seemed like nothing to the person who gave it to us, but it changed our lives. I heard one of our guests recently say that she heard the word no so many times from friends, family members, even agencies, that she started to wonder if she was even worthy of being helped at all. And that breaks my heart. It should break all of our hearts because her suffering, that's our suffering. So I want to offer just a couple of things in closing, and both of them revolve around this idea of interconnectedness and the reality that we're all interconnected. And the first thing I want to suggest is that all of us take a little time to remember this week that person or those people in your life who recognized that we're all interconnected, and so they took a shot on you. They invested in you. They gave you a hand up, even though it might have been risky for them. Take some time to be grateful for that person this week. Maybe it's a Sunday school leader who showed up faithfully week after week, trying to be a presence, a positive presence in your life when you weren't paying any attention whatsoever. Or maybe it's a teacher who saw potential in you for the first time. Or maybe it's the partner who keeps on sticking with you, even though in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, has turned into sickness, 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 poorer, 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 but they keep sticking with you. Or, we're all Methodists here. Maybe it's the person who recognized the healing qualities of casseroles made of cream of mushroom soup and always seems to show up with them at the right time. They might not even remember it. It might even just be a habit for them. But for you, it was life-changing, and it finally got you thinking, maybe I am worthy of being helped. Maybe I am worthy of being loved. Think about that person this week, and I want you to try something. Reach out to them. A text, an email, a phone call, it doesn't have to be anything grandiose. Just give them a quick call to say, years ago, you did something for me. You may have even forgotten about it, but I want you to know it changed my life. But then the second thing that I want to say in closing, and maybe most importantly, keep that gift in circulation. Keep it in circulation. Give a hand up to somebody who might feel like they're not even worth helping, because we are all way more interconnected than we realize. Amen? Amen.